Hey guys, Travis Gillespie, and the last uh, videos that we looked at representing information or relations in different ways. And now we're going to move on to our next section. In our next section, we're going to actually look at some graphs here and actually find the domain and range of a relation. So let's say that, let's put a graph up here on the board, and we'll actually see what we're doing. When you're given a relation or have a relation on a graph, um, or graphically or otherwise, what ends up happening is you automatically have um, a domain and a range. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Let's get this set up. So I got, oh, I don't know. Let's say that somewhere around here, and here I got a second point, and let's make this a continuous graph. So to do that, gotta get a line, and I'll connect my points from point 1. That's a little bit large size. I don't like that size, so let's make that a little bit smaller. Reconnect them again. I'm going to use this second point size here. So you're automatically given a domain and a range, and the domain um, actually represents all the allowable x values or allowable first coordinates. Remember your first coordinates. Um, when we were looking at relations earlier, the first coordinates are your x values. So the domain is all the x values. It's not all of the x values because there's numerous, infinite amounts of x values. So the domain is really only the allowable x values. All allowable x values. It'd help if I spelled it right. Which means that your range is going to be all of the allowable y values. And that's supposed to be an e right here. So moving forward from here, here's a relation that you're looking at graphically. And so let's record the domain and the range. Well, how do you find these things? Well, one way is to start at, let's think of the domain alone. And we're going to start at x equals 1. And the first thing that you're going to do is run along where x equals 1 and say, hey, am I crossing the graph or the relation? And no, I'm not. Where x equals 1, I do not cross the graph. I don't run across the relation. So let's move along to where x equals 2 and do the same thing. Run along and say, hey, do you run across the relation or the graph? Nope. So move on. And when you finally get to 3, you say, hey, wait a second, my finger or my pen in my scenario or case runs over the graph, it crosses over the graph, it crosses over this relation. So yes, this does. So I can write down that within this section, let's get a different color real quick, where x equals 3. Not sure if the pink comes up that well. I probably need a darker color. So where the x, and I'm just doing dashed lines here. So where x equals 3, yes, 3 would be a part of my domain. And if I moved along, actually, if I moved all the way along, all the x values work until I get to my 7. And again, 7 actually is the last value within this interval that is an allowable value for the domain. So if I were to write this up, I would say, hey, x is at least equal to 3, but if I run across the horizontal axis, I see that, well, x is actually greater than 3 too, so it also, x is greater or equal to 3. Or another way to say it would be 3 is less than or equal to x But x is greater or equal to 3. However, x is less than or equal to 7. This is how I'd write up this domain. But how do I do it for the range now? Now, how do I do that? Well, let's do the same that I did before. I'm going to run across where y equals 1 and say, hey, does 1 run across the relation or the graph? No, it doesn't. So move on to the next value of 2. Does 2 run across the relation? And yeah, absolutely does. It does where 7x and 2y meet up. And you will see that, hey, this actually, the range is allowable from positive 2 all the way up to positive 8, and then it stops. So my interval here, need another dark color, we'll do a purple. Is at the 2 all the way up to the 8. So here are my two ranges. And now I know, well, x is equal to 2, but it's also moving greater to 2. So x is greater than 2, x greater or equal to 2. However, it's less than or equal to 8. So another way of looking at this is to say, hey, the domain is all of the values between 3 and 7 that I'm highlighting right here. And the range is all of the y values between 2 and 8 right here. So just highlighting the range here. So here, I'm going to change the pencil again. Oop, change the pencil. Here, I have my domain, or my range in purple. I have my domain and my range for this particular relation.